introduce our program for tonight. Nici Angell. Nici has a degree. Y'all know her. Maybe you don't know. Nici has a degree in biology, minor in math and theaters. She's a lot smarter. From Livingston University in Alabama. She worked for the National Park Service, Parkway, and has also been a teacher. In addition, she has been a Master Gardener, Georgia Mountains Master Gardener since 2014. Her focus with them is as a naturalist in historic gardening and farming. Nici is a talented artist with several online stores, and she makes wonderful soap. If you miss Nici and her soap making out front July the 4th, you really miss it. Awesome. She volunteers at the Dahlonega Gold Museum, both outside in the gardens and inside in historical clothing. And she has also volunteered as a docent in the old jail since 2017. She is also quite an accomplished seamstress, makes all her own stuff. If you ask her, she will eat. She's authentic all the way down. Yeah. She's lived in Dahlonega 14 years and has been active in the Historical Society since 2017, and we're thrilled to have her with us. So please welcome.
Well, today we're going to talk about Georgia fiber, all the different fibers that we have grown here in Georgia, and mostly a focus for right here with a couple of things that are not. We used to grow our clothes. We couldn't chemically create polyesters and acetates, so we grew it all. And we'll start with our most common one, which is cotton. Our little fluffy clouds that you see out in all the fields. Now, cotton is an interesting plant. There was a native cotton originally here already. We don't really know what it looks like anymore because we've accidentally wiped it out with a commercial crop. So when Columbus got here in 1492, cotton was already here. It's another form, and the fibers were not as long. But by the time we decided to become the United States, everybody was already growing the cottons from the Sudan. And we did this because the cottons from the Sudan had much longer fibers. American fibers were short, about 2 inches. The Sudanian cottons were 3 to 4 inches long. So they made for easier spinning, easier harvesting, and made finer clothes out of it. We believe the very first cotton was planted in Florida in 1556. By 1606, we already had it in Virginia. However, even though Virginia is the first place where we had it in our colonies, the first commercial crops of it here in Georgia. And this is because we had the correct environment to grow it in the lowlands of Georgia. Oddly, cotton does just fine up here, but it is a very, very hungry crop. There are a few crops that just absolutely are starving, and cotton is one of them. It will strip the soil very quickly. So does tobacco. It also strips the soil rapidly. And because of this, you had the colonists and the initial plantations so enormous, not because they were producing cotton on every acre, but because they needed to slash and burn constantly. Burn the forests that were here, and then plant cotton again. And, well, you know, that's not sustainable. After a while, you run out of forest. Some of the better plantations figured this out pretty fast, and they rotated other crops in there. They rotated flax, for example. They rotated peanuts later on. They did not rotate tobacco onto those same fields because tobacco strips the nutrients even faster than cotton. But they did rotate crops as much as they could. Our first textile mill was in 1811 near Washington, Georgia. And we only were able to really get into cotton with the advent of the modern cotton gin. We already had cotton gins. They had been around for well over 600 years, but the original cotton gins were just two wooden rollers that you were squishing the cotton ball through. And when you squished it through, the seeds squirt out one side, and the fibers squirt out at the other, but the fibers were all tangled up. The modern gin from Eli Whitney had cones that grabbed the fibers and pulled them off the seeds and already made it into roving, ready to use as soon as it was pulled from the machine. So it made a big change in the cotton industry. This is cotton when it's growing, or at least the top part. We start with a cotton seed and a seedling and first leaves and cotton buds, and I wish they showed one of these guys open. They look like hibiscus. They're a beautiful flower, magnificent in the garden. Don't plant it, the government will chase you. It is illegal to grow cotton unless you're one of the humongous farmers or you have a special dispense to grow cotton. And it all is because of the cotton boll weevil from the 1920s. When the boll weevil invaded our crops and destroyed the cotton, we had several years where there were some real problems. And that's when we started the industrial farms looking at the little guys saying, we can't have the little guys because they're not watching their crops close enough, and allowing the boll weevil to spread easier. Well, now we have that stupid weevil mostly under control, but it's still illegal for you to grow cotton because it's part of large industry now. However, illegally, you can purchase cotton seeds and grow the plant and find out it has a beautiful hibiscus flower. And since we're talking about cotton, I'll pass around some cotton. And
Is it an annual?
yes, it's an annual. It grows very rapidly.
Yeah.
Cotton in the field, it goes from the seedling to this tall in about a month and a half. But once it goes into the flowering stage, it slows way down. And it takes all the way to, usually they'll plant it pretty early and harvest is in September. And you can tell harvest in the regions where you have cotton because everywhere you drive, there are green balls on the side of the road because they blow out of the trucks. And we had a cotton market here. And here it is. Somewhere on South Grove Street was a cotton market. Who knows where? Although some of the information tells me that it was somewhere on 60. And just because of what you can vaguely see here, terrain-wise, it's pretty flat out here. And this makes me wonder, is this along the waters somewhere around where the golf club is?
Chest.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Because that's really the flattest zone. And you're not seeing a lot going on behind here. And when you have a better picture, you can really look at it. And you don't see gullies, you don't see things around it, and it's very flat. And that's why I think it probably was somewhere in the area of the golf course. Because it puts it beside a river for additional transport, and it's on the main road, and it's fairly central for Lumpkin County. We don't know exactly. I have seen this photograph a couple of places. And the dates on it changes depending on where I've seen this. This one, however, is one of the proper pictures, and this is probably the date. But you can't even date it by what the guys are wearing, because guys' clothing doesn't change that much, especially the farmers. So I can't look at this and say exactly which way from 1915 to 1920 it is, and it's still a horse-drawn wagon. I don't know. This is a bale of cotton. The size has not changed. It even is this size today. And a good acreage, you'll get almost a bale of cotton. Or up here, down south, you can get 2 bales or 2.5 bales of cotton per acre. You needed to produce at least 1 bale of cotton up here a year as your cash crop in order to do things like pay your taxes that had to be paid in cash. You couldn't barter your taxes, you needed a cash crop, and cotton was it until the boll weevil hit. And related to cotton is this bonnet, where Chris announced that I was going to talk about the Dahlonega bonnet, and I had attended it. So this is the Dahlonega bonnet. When we were starting Gold Rush in its first iterations, the ladies wanted to be all set up for old-fashioned days, and they looked everywhere in all the pattern makers, and nobody had bonnets. So the first year they took apart some bonnets, figured out what all the local bonnets looked like, created it, and then they managed to get McCall's to put out a pattern. And the Historic Society has one of those. We need to sell it.
It was published?
It was published. Yes. And the ladies got a whole grand total of $15 for handing over 3 patterns forever. Although, no matter what McCall's or any of the pattern makers want to tell you, they cannot put a patent on clothing, including this bonnet. So say it was 25 cents.
What year was it?
1980.
This is 55.
The letter's 55.
Yeah, the letter's 55, but the pattern came out that year. They were actually very rapid with having it come on out. And then all the ladies had to make the bonnets. Here are the 3 styles you could make, with this one being the hussy. Which one should I be wearing? Not today. And proudly, here they are holding the patterns. And we have some great information on this. Yes.
I made your hat.
I made my hat.
You made the.
The only thing I didn't make was my shoes.
Well, so Vicky,
Yeah.
I grew up in Louisiana.
Uh-huh.
I picked plenty cotton.
I picked cotton
Yeah,
too.
it was not fun,
No.
but I tried to get away with just riding, like sitting on my mom's sack and ride a lot on the roads. But my grandmother, I grew up next to my grandmother, she always wore one of those bonnets, and in French you call that a gassolet. A gassolet. And I have her gassolet.
That'd be in Cajun French.
Yeah, Cajun French. Gassolet.
Where you get the phrase all gussied up?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Some nutrients that extract from the soil, but.
It is heavily an eater of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Those are the 3 it pulls the heaviest. It also pulls a lot of calcium. And that's where you're ending up with a problem when you're rotating crops in it, in where the cotton used to be, because most of the time the rotation crops cannot put enough back into the soil because of the 3 main and then the last one that it tends to pull out.
We've got cover crop, what we call a cover crop.
Yeah.
And they plowed under.
Yeah, and the best cover crop for cotton then was any of the clovers. However, they mostly could not plant the clovers because getting the seeds was an issue. So they had a tendency to do one of the grasses. However, today, the most common cover crop, if they bother doing it, and they mostly do not, the most common cover crop is a type of radish that they put in. It grows about this tall, makes a huge radish. When it's big, you don't want to eat it, and they till that back in. And that seems to be a fairly good nitrogen fixer. And it does a pretty good job of getting the calciums, potassiums, and phosphoruses back in the soil. But they do rotate some clover in. It's just the best nitrogen fixer there is.
We traveled all over the winter, go through southern Georgia, French Mountain down there. And they're growing
Stop.
cotton every year in the same field. So
Yeah.
I guess they're adding.
It's fertilized to death. It is fertilized to death for one, and it is herbicide to death up and down the roads, and they use a ton of pesticides on it till the flowers open. Once the flowers open, they have to cease all pesticides in order for the bees to go in there and do their job. They can't pollinate if you're killing all your bees. But the rest of the time, it's a pretty dirty crop. And there are better ways to do it, and some companies do it. Unfortunately, most of that cotton leaves the United States and goes to Europe. So now we're up to linen. What the heck is linen? It's flax. It's flax. So every single time you eat a bread with flax seeds on it, you're eating what comes from this plant. We don't use flax very much anymore as a fiber. It's problematic to process, but we love the seeds. The earliest evidence of flax being used was in the Republic of Georgia. There's another Georgia. And it was from the Paleolithic time of 30,000 years ago. It is one of our oldest semi-crops. The only other crop that's coming up around this time of being used are gourds. So gourds and flax are two earliest crop-like items. And here it is growing in the field. It is really pretty stuff. And nowadays we can buy an awful lot of cultivars of flax to put in the garden just for its flowers, and it grows extra short. Because natural flax wants to be up here. Good stuff's up here. The medium stuff's about this tall. And here is where it originates. This Georgia over here. In case you did not know where the Republic of Georgia was. Flax went throughout, at 30,000 years, all of the world was using flax. There wasn't any place where there wasn't flax or a related to this blue flowered flax being used, processed, and buried in our tombs. Every time you see the Egyptians all dressed up in all of their hieroglyphics and all their art, you're looking at flax. That was their favorite fiber. It was easy to grow, grew there well, and processed fairly simply. Here in the United States, probably the first flax actually showed up in Canada before it made it down into the colonies. And here it is. You see, I rated, I think this is from Jamestown. So here are flax seeds. We all know what this stuff looks like. And we grew it for a lot of things, not just fiber. So here we are putting it in the ground in 1785. And this is what it looks like when you harvest it. You've yanked it out of the ground. Flax is one of those drops, you always pull it out. You don't siphon it. And you pull it out because the roots added this much more fiber to it. So you didn't want to lose any of that plant. So you kept it. You pulled it out of the ground. And the first thing you did was you allowed it to dry in the field, standing up like this. This is the time when the seeds are ripening. So here's pulling, and stacking it up is called scooting. And this step, rippling, is where you're pulling the seeds out. And that's done on these huge metal cones made with enormous long nails, this long, that are not very sharp. And you just throw the fiber bundle on and pull, and it pulls all the seed heads off. From that point, you go into hackling. That's where you're breaking it up and starting to make it into the fiber bundles. Scooching, where you're taking off the outside, last of the outside of the bundles, and finally spinning it. And then flax is interesting. It can be all sorts of colors. Flax I'm going to send around to you is kind of grayish colored. You get it last. I saw that.
Okay.
Put it in the video.
Now, it can also come out naturally fairly blonde and almost white at this point before spinning. But that is according to how you processed it. Flax is one of those oddballs that you need to break down the outside of the plant first. And to break that down, you either let it rot into people, or you let it rot underwater. And it smells really bad processing it. If you're rotting underwater, you can rot in a still pond, and it takes about 3 weeks before you're ready to further the process. In running water, it's 2 weeks, and you get the lightest color. Let's see if this plays.
The magical process of uncovering linen fibres from a crop of flax grown in Devon. So there's some really good words in this process, starting with threshing, that separates the seeds from the main plant. Winnowing outside separates the lighter seed casings from the heavier seed. And these are some flax seedlings in a nearby grow box. This is a traditional wooden tool used for breaking. It shatters the woody outer stem so you can get to the spinnable fibres inside. And then with a handmade scratching knife, you can just flick away all the impurities, fining the strands with these heckling combs to split and straighten the flaxen hair. These can be organised into length, the longest being the best for spinning and weaving into linen cloth. The shorter strands can be gathered to make 2-ply cord by twisting them tightly against one another in opposite directions. You'll make this beautiful spiraling cord that's really strong.
So even then, the seeds were used for more than one thing. People did not eat the seeds. We fed them to animals, and we made linseed oil. So every time you read about somebody's oil painting with linseed oil, or putting linseed oil on leather to keep it supple, or using it on ships to waterproof decks a little bit, or as a waterproofing material, it comes from the flaxseed. It's strong, it's tough. The more you wash it, the softer it gets. It breathes much better than cotton does. It's stronger wet than dry, so you can really wring it out. And it resists moss and dirt. And because it is so much cooler, in this time period, all underclothing would have been linen. And for this particular outfit, I do have a top underneath all this between the corset and breast that is made out of linen, and there's an enormous difference wearing cotton next to the skin, wearing linen next to the skin. It feels 5 degrees cooler to switch over to linen. Even what I'm wearing now, with all the bits and pieces and stuff, all the undergarments. At this point, this petticoat would have been made out of linen because it's far more breathable and it's tough. Let me give you a good idea of how tough it is. Think about a modern cotton t-shirt. You wash it 100 times, it's pretty much done. 100 times with a good linen shirt, and it's just starting to be broken in. You'll get at least 200 washes out of it, if not more. So it's a nice tough fiber. And does everyone recognize the spinning wheel in the picture? So we obviously, we have this one in the old jail. Even in the photograph, you see it's missing part. And it's missing parts here. Even at this picture with Aunt 9 at this spinning wheel. And this one is specifically for flax, depending on what you spun, depending on what this end looked like with your spinning. Onto wool. Ah, the fiber we give a terrible name to. It's itchy and hot. No, it's itchy and hot because we only have access to really crappy. Good wool comes from sheep like the guy on the back of this board that I'm going to get at. And you can touch all this wool. Some of it is carded and pretty much ready to go. And you can feel it's actually very soft. And then some of it's still dirty. It still has bits in it, and it's still soft. Wool's problem, the blunt ends. The blunt ends is what makes it itchy. So the shorter the fibers are, the more that wool is going to itch. The longer the fibers are, better. You and I, we never get access to long stuff. Typical household, typical family needed 2 to 8 sheep in order to have enough fiber for the household 1 year. And sheep are not smart. They're just not. They're not smart. They always need somebody or something with them to keep an eye on them because they'll wander right off a cliff. They're not the smartest creatures. They're sweet. They're not so smart. This one specifically, these guys, I chose this picture. This is the wrong picture. This is not one for wool. These are meat sheep. Because you see the wool is coming off by itself. And that indicates it's a meat sheep. Sheep that are for wool have been bred to not let go of the wool, so we have to shave it off. And wool is interesting for processing. You need to obviously cut it off the sheep that I don't have here. You need to wash it first before you do anything else with it. Then you cut it into grades. You're going to take the bottom where it's on the tummy. That's not going to be really good stuff. You're going to take that off. The stuff off the head, it's not going to be great. You're going to cut that away. You're going to cut it off from their bottom. That's not going to be great stuff either. The stuff right along here are the best fibers. There was a high chance, even in this time, that your family, if you had 8 sheep, you might be selling the wool as a cash crop as well, and only keeping the cruddy stuff for yourself. So after you would sort the wool, this is when you would decide, am I going to sell some of this wool or am I keeping it all? Then you card it. Once it's carded and all the weird stuff is out, then you're going to use a comb to get out the shortest fibers, and those get put off to the side for another process. then you spin it. This is a drop spindle. By the time 1884 has hit, we are not using drop spindles. We've had a spinning wheel for a really long time. And then we make yarn or thread or whatever we're going to do with it. From this point, your next step would be dyeing your wool. And the reason why you dye it at the end and not at the beginning is at the end, when you boil it in the colorant, you are setting the twist, so it will not untwist on you as soon as you go to spin it or do anything else. And we know we must have had both flax up here and wool up here, or we would not have linsey woolsey coverlets left that we now have in the museum. And I took this one. Looks better on the computer. This is one of our coverlets, and its original color would have been bright white, royal blue, and a screaming bright cardinal red. It's faded this much over time, but that was the typical coloration for things in this time period. Remember I said you pulled out all those really short fibers because you didn't spin those guys? Those short fibers in felt. And you could either felt small amounts to do things like hats or put it with instruments or just add something or stuff your pillow. Or you could get several families together, work it in a large area, and it's a pretty common rub. Linsey woolsey, the flax, the linen, goes this way. It is your warp, always. And wool goes this way. It is your weft, always, because linen does not stretch. Onto silk.
Can I say something
Yes.
about the sheep?
Yes.
My city husband got some acreage and he wanted to raise sheep. And then he wanted to learn how to shear them. And so he had me, thought he was gonna have me. So he has me hold the legs and here's all the maggots crawling all over because it gets back there in that hair and that. And I left, I said, no way. And he did learn to do it by himself, take the market, but they really are dumb. In the winter, they would just drop their babies just outside.
Oh yeah.
in the cold.
Anywhere, higgly,
So we
wiggly.
had triplets in our base, and that was a job to keep clean. That's our sheep story.
Yeah, sheep are definitely not smart. And when you're raising sheep, know what you're doing. Fairly early on in the growth process of their lovely wool, you shave their butt around
He
the
didn't
tail,
know that.
and that alleviates that particular issue. And I just have the weirdest selection of knowledge, don't I? Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about silk. Yeah, we grew silk in Georgia. So silk originally was started in 1749 because the British House of Commons gave a bounty to get silk started here. They sent the materials over and said for the colony would receive 40 shillings for every woman who learned the art of silk winding. Notice the colony got the money, not the women. And for the first 3 women that figured this out and were successful, there would be an additional 5 shilling bounty paid to their husband. Not to her, because we were property. Anyway, oddly enough, all the successful women that figured this out all came from Salzburg, Austria. And that's particularly odd for me because my mother mother's family comes from Baden, Austria, which is only about 2 hours away from Salzburg. So there's a chance I'm related to these original people. We say this because we have certain individuals in the family tree that just go poof. And they were husband-wife pairs. And the first thing you need if you're going to have silk is you need mulberry trees. And the British at least got it right and brought in the correct kind, the white mulberry. White mulberries have blackberries. Black mulberries can have red mulberries. Red mulberries can have any colored berry. They're named after their bark and not the berry, just to add lots of confusion to the mix. Silkworms will only eat white mulberry leaves. And this is the only thing that I could find showing the process in this time period. This is winding straight from the silkworm cocoons. And over here, they're processing them, opening them up. To process them, take oil to kill the little thing on the inside, and then you eat the little thing after you unwind it. Okay. You stir fry it, at least in Asia. In 1760, 1,205 pounds of raw silk was produced by the colony. Why? What happened? They were doing so good. So much silk. It was going to blow up. It was going to be a major money producer for the colonies. Yeah. Until the British came through and said, hey, they were making way too much silk and good money. They burned the entire town and all the mulberry trees to the ground. So even the people who managed to get away with the worms couldn't feed them. And they starved to death, and that was the end of the industry. And we never brought it back. This is what it looks like, the entire process. So you have mating moths. The silkworm moth has been domesticated for so long, they cannot survive in the wild at all anymore. They must have our intervention. Neither one can fly. Look at those wings. They're atrophied. So they can't fly anymore. They rely on us. They're like a cow. The eggs get laid. They hatch into caterpillars. I know it says worms, they're caterpillars. The young larvae on the leaves, when they're late stage, then they make their cocoons on a mount. Even back then they did. It's a basket. A coarse woven basket. Then you have their cocoons, and if you allow the process to continue, the cocoon will open and moth comes out, and here you go. But what we do is at this stage, you boil the cocoon that releases the natural enzyme glues that hold the cocoon in place, and you can draw the silk off in one continuous strand. And each strand is about as long as a football field.
It's for thing.
On each cocoon.
Pretty thin.
Oh yes, it's very, very thin and fine. And even throughout history, you don't waste anything. So the little larvae that you've already boiled, meaning they're ready to eat, or eat. It's one of the bugs I haven't eaten yet. Here's another set of pictures showing again the process. And here is the boil vat. And you're actually winding off the boil vat. So there's a couple being pulled up, and here you can see the fibers. But again, these guys cannot survive without us anymore. These dresses and accessories are examples of silk. In 1887, it was the nicest photograph I could find. Silk is the fabric of choice for everybody. It is light, it is airy, it breathes really well. It's surprisingly tough. Very, very thin. You can make a wonderful velvet out of it. Really nice velvet and centenes and brocades. It lends itself well to color. It'll take color really, really well. Hence these very bright outfits versus the natural in the white. And we run into a problem. Good silk whistles. So what did they do? They added heavy metal salts to the silk to force it to be crisp and rustly. And that meant the silk degraded sometimes as fast as 2 weeks
Wow.
from the point that they've added the salts to. And that means we have lost a huge chunk of silks in this time period because anything from lower grade silks didn't survive.
And what was the reason for it?
They added it because good silk rustled. So it made a sound. It made a sound like paper. It rustled. It was stiff. It had a very specific sound to it. So they faked the cheap silk into sounding like expensive silk by adding the metal salts. That degraded the silk almost instantly and made people break out. And guys, of course, had silk in their hats, for their cravats, for their vests and their shirts, though only the rich could afford it. They ran into the problem, the hat was always good quality silk, so they didn't have their hats degrade on it. But we do have written notices and diaries and even in newspapers where the account says that someone went to the opera and his vest fell apart for the end of the opera. And this wonderful silk quilt had jail. This was donated. It originally was donated to the state of Georgia. It was sent to the Gold Museum. And the state of Georgia said because Ella Catherine London, who married a Park, by the way, was not a famous person, the state was going to throw it in the garbage can. And entirely silk quilt. Silk quilts are very, very rare because the silk shatters. And only the upper class could afford to make an entire quilt out of silk. Normally, quilts are made of cottons, linens, with cotton being predominant. So this one was going to go into the trash. It had 22 places that had to be repaired. I fixed it. And now it is on display, and you can learn more about this quilt if you come to the jail. I'll talk about it. But we have a nice board with its history. It was on the individual squares were what was actually put together here in Dahlonega, while the stitching happened in Louisiana. And the backing went on in Louisiana. And it was all, they took over 100 years to finish this silly thing. And it made me feel so much better because the half-finished quilt that I have that hasn't been finished for the past 2 years, I don't feel bad. They took over 100 years to finish this.
Isn't that considered a memory quilt? Like all the fabrics were supposed to be a memory of somebody?
This is a crazy quilt. It might have been a memory quilt if anybody would have wrote anything down, but nobody did. The lore attached to this quilt, the family says this is made out of hat silk. Not really. All right, there's one piece. This one is hat silk. All the rest of the silks, and this is velvets, brocades, there are many different kinds, including some ribbon. All the rest of the silk in here is from all sorts of different things. This is from a robe, a men's robe, I am sure. There's a lot of black in here, and black was usually only morning clothes. So it's unusual there's so much black in this one. Because when Ella made this, she was between 18 and 22 years old, somewhere in there. She shouldn't have had that much black. And it's more vibrant than this actually looks. So you have to come to the jail and look at it. And now we get to the demonized fiber, hemp. Here's hemp growing. This is proper hemp growing, not magic weeds. This is hemp. And you can see how tall it gets. 1 acre of this stuff can do as much paper as 3 acres of forest. This guy does it in 1 year. Think of how long a forest has to grow before we can harvest it. And there are more things with it. We've had it at least 10,000 years. The newest, I finished this and then I found new research. We now think that some of the linen that we have in the archaeological record is actually hemp. So it goes further back in time than 10,000 years. I can explain that further later. Almost all canvas was made from hemp. It wasn't made from hemp, it was made from linen. Those are the 2 fibers for canvas. Our Declaration of Independence was done on hemp. And unlike most crops, this is a crop that puts things back into the soil, and it has the ability to rehabilitate soil. You have a nasty chemical spill, plant hemp. For some reason, it has the ability to draw in the correct microbes to break down chemical spills. In 1767, in the Virginia Gazette, there were front page instructions for growing hemp, and you were expected, everybody who had the acreage for it, you were expected to grow hemp. And most states, or at that time, most colonies, had kind of a bounty set up. You were required to grow X amount, and you would be paid, it was a shilling, for, I think, 5 acres. But everybody was expected to grow hemp. It was really long fiber. It does not stretch when it gets wet. It's very tough. And the better hemp is very comfortable for wearing. Even though we didn't use it a lot for fabrics, we mostly used it for sailcloth and ropes for our ships. So it was a completely legal, normal crop until the middle century. Somebody, pharmaceutical company, decided that the flowers made too many people happy. And they banned the crop, which is very odd because you let very little of your crop go to seed. Soon as hemp goes to seed, the fibers degrade and you don't get as good of a crop. So if you have 50 acres, you're only going to let a ½ acre of that stuff go to seed. So you have something to replant, if you're going to replant. Georgia was okay. We had the hemp industry coming back, and just last month, the governor signed it to law. You couldn't grow hemp anymore.
What did they grow it for back then?
Rope and linen, linens, canvases, burlap, sheets, paper. It was the most important for paper. Paper was a mix of cotton and hemp with a little bit of linen in it. So, because it's tough. And everybody grew it. We were required to grow it.
Why did the governor think we shouldn't grow it anymore?
Because he decided that 18-year-olds might get into one of the fields and try to smoke.
Oh,
That's the really simplified version of what went around. Now we're going to talk about some weirdos that we did have, we used extensively, though we have almost no record of it anymore. We have stinging nettle, grows about this tall, dogbane that can grow up to this tall, and milkweed. Now, milkweed, I know what everybody's going to think about what we're growing it for, but you'll see it in a minute. Nettle fibers, stinging nettle. Not everybody is affected by the sting. I don't. I can go eat a stinging nettle and good to go. By the way, it's tasty. The fibers are nice and long, harvested correctly. It's about this long. So it's a nice long fiber. You treat it just like you treat flax. You go through the same processing of breading it and scooching it and pulling it through the combs. It's nice and cool in summer. It's winter. It's soft, surprisingly soft. And it's fire retardant. I had no idea about it being fire retardant. That was new as of 2 days ago. The next fiber is dogbane, also known as Indian hemp. This is what already grew here in the United States and had been used for thousands of years by the Native Americans. It's a favorite. Unfortunately, this is about the only slide that showed everything together, and it's done as cordage. But the plant itself does have nice fine fiber if you process it well. It was a common plant in wet areas. So everywhere where you had cane brakes, you also had dogbane. Your cane brakes is what you used for basket making, and then your dogbane was what you used to make the rest of your fibers, your clothing. And then we have milkweed. And it's not just these nice fluffs that you use. You can use the whole plant. Once again, it makes long fibers. And unlike the last two, milkweed fibers are already very, very long. They're pretty white. And you can see it right in here. This makes nice, tough clothing or cloth. When you're using the silks, it makes a light, fluffy, very nice fiber. It is a pain in the neck to spin. It spins poorly because it's very, very smooth. The fibers are only this long. Short fibers are more difficult to spin than long fibers are. And oddly, this part was a very, very important crop throughout the First and Second World Wars. Does anybody have a guess why? Parachutes? Nope.
Life preservers.
Right. I knew Chris would know.
My dad told me that's what they had to do when he was a kid, was had to go out and pick milkweed for that
Yes.
life
Life
preservers.
It naturally floats and it floats well. Lightweight and floats. And everybody was sent out to pick the stuff during the wars.
Butterflies like it.
Yes. The monarchs get unhappy when we steal it all. This is what milkweed, the main fiber, the stalks, look like when it's spun. Look at how light colored this stuff is. And this is not even someone who's real familiar with spinning. This is demo spinning. And look at how light and beautiful those fibers are. So those are three of the fibers that the Native Americans used and then passed along to us. But for the Native American aspect of it, they used several barks, bast, which is the inside between the bark and the main part of the tree. They used certain leaves. By the way, the dogwood, you can get a fiber about this long out of each dogwood. You snap it and pull, you'll see the fibers. It's how I was taught to know dogwood from other plants when it's not clipping. Dogbane, stinging nettle, milkweed, pawpaw. So you ate the fruit and you also processed the stems, pawpaws, red mulberry, which is our native mulberry. Mulberry bark be processed into fibers. Bear grass. It grows about this tall and is reddish on top. Rattlesnake master, I should have pulled up a picture of this one. This one kind of looks like a nettle. And it's silvery gray and has wonderful fiber. Again, a light fiber. And yucca. So, Chris, there's more use for the yucca plants that are in every cemetery. And of course, animal fibers in the Southeast included bison. We keep forgetting the bison were here until the white man went and shot them all. Possums and rabbit hair. Rabbit hair made some of the finest, nicest cloth. And this I included because the scientists in me wanted to know, why are some fibers spun more often than others? Wool, coarse wool, cruddy wool, is real fat, and look at all the scales, which means it grabs itself easily, makes it easy to spin. Even fine wool has a bunch of scales to hang on. Alpaca is scaly. Cashmere is scaly, while silk is a flat. Look, there's nothing to this. Really, really flat, and that makes it more difficult for spinning. So someone who's spinning silk has to be more skillful than if you spin wool. I've spun wool, I've spun cotton, and I've spun flax, and mystery fibers. Linen looks pretty flat, except when you see it this way. Look at the individual little kind of breaks, ridges that go side up and down along its path. And that's what allows it to grab hold of itself. And cotton naturally has a twist to it. So you better spin it in the correct direction or it wants to undo itself. Luckily, it wants to be in this direction. And then straight polyester are modern fibers. This is why you don't hand spin fibers. They're too difficult. So fiber. Come look at what we've got.
Now that's flax, right? Isn't that flax rice?
Yes. And this dress, if you haven't come and really taken a look at it, this was royal blue, white, green, and red.
Wow.
There are that many colors individually in the plaid that this dress is. And this is only one example of many fiber type things. So I'm plugging Come Out to the Jail.
Wasn't that woven?
Yeah.
By a
By
person
one
that
yeah.
brought their weaving thing to the area.
We don't know. Our knowledge of this one says that she wove her own. She did all the steps herself. And not had the outside people come in.
But there were outside people that
There were
did that.
lots of outside people. Now here in this region, not everybody bothered to have a loom. You had traveling weavers that would come in once or twice a year, set up in a larger building. Often it was a church. And you brought all your fiber to them and you chose from a sample book that they had what pattern they would weave for you. You have to think that no matter the fiber, it takes about 7 hours of spinning to make 1 hour for weaving. 1 hour of weaving makes this much fabric. I am wearing, I just finished this one. I have 8.5 yards on, not including the undergarments. Think of how much time that really would have been in 1887. Because this is 1884.
That's with a hand one. That's not what the loom that the people brought.
That's what with a loom they would have brought.
Oh,
It still would take an hour. But you know, they're throwing the shuttles very quickly.
Yeah.
That's not the same as when you're have industry with spinning and weaving, that goes much, much faster. And I think that's my last slide. It is! So we go back to this because it's pretty. All right, questions? Where was Ebenezer? Along the coast down by Savannah. It was a handy place. It had a good sized creek running by it, so they even had a way to get the silk from Ebenezer itself out to a port, then over to Europe. It would have been great if British had worked it down. We might have kept our industry.
Worked at State Park Victoria was a founding person that developed the land. He tried to, he was a German immigrant. Moved in South Florida. He tried to grow mulberry trees for the silk.
Well, he did, and
He was very successful, I'm sure, growing the mulberry.
well, he did some stuff. He did some support. But I don't think it developed.
I don't think it lasts.
Weather, I think, got him out. Storm came along.
Yeah.
He was trying to.
And in modern silk, the one that I did not send around,
Back in 1880 something.
this particular silk is from a different type of silk. And is a jungle one. And it comes from Indonesia. And it happens to be raw silk. I have a company that I pawned into giving me samples so I would have it when I talk about these things.
So does all modern silks come from Asia today?
Yeah, because they have all the processing down and they still have all the cheap silk. It's still labor intensive. You can only do so much of it by machine. The initial boil and initial pick out, every one of the fibers has to be done by hand before it's sent into the machine that oil it. So it's still that's why I'm wearing for upper middle class at no higher, because I cannot afford to purchase 11 yards of fabric to make a dress. I have no silk. The only time I've had silk is when I worked in the bridal industry and had silk dresses, and that was terrible.
How much you think 8 yards of silk would cost?
I will tell you 1 yard of silk of low grade right now is running around $36. And that's without a pattern. That is a straight colored silk, but not the knobby silk. I have a whole bolt of knobby silk. I still haven't touched it. I'm just so pleased that I have this knobby silk, but I would not wear it. It is rough and uncomfortable.
Show the picture, you said that 4 ounces of silk. What did they do right away to keep it difficult? Also, look how they.
No, when you pull your fiber, your hook, okay. The process goes, have a boiling pot with your cocoons. You pull out the individual fibers, stick them in your hand. You find the ends, so you have a handful of it, and then you put it on the reel and turn the reel to reel it on up. And because the little caterpillar wound it around itself, the caterpillar didn't put in it. And the caterpillar doesn't cross over anywhere, so it unwinds very soon. But you have to have it wet, hot, and not too hot, because then you overcook yourself.
So it comes out, so single.
A single perfect strand. And at the very end of the cocoon is the only time where the silk has a tendency to break, it's lower quality, and that's what turns into knobby silk. That's what's processed for knobby stuff. Which still has all the nice silk properties, except.
What about linen? Do you have any manufacturers of linen in our country?
No,
Nobody makes linen.
nobody makes linen.
We're mostly immature.
Ireland. Ireland in the Middle East of all places. It used to, it used to be a huge, huge crop, but because the normal process of retting or rotting it is done in water, it is an extremely dirty process. And when we started to environmentally realize you were destroying the waterways south of where you were working on it, this is when it got reeled in and we were switching over to polyesters and acetates and things like that. It's been brought back and it's growing rapidly in Europe, Middle East, North Africa, Asia, even India. This is a crop that's coming back and coming back fast because you can purchase, like the linen that I have underneath all of this was $10 a yard. 20 years ago, it was $25 a yard. So the price has gone down because more places are producing it again. It's great stuff. My undergarment, the shirt that's underneath all this, has gone through the wash 4 times. And I can tell because this is what it's like when I first cut it. You can feel it's real stiff. It has not been starched. And it just gets softer every single time it's washed. And it breathes so much better than wrinkles. Yes, that's the only downfall. It's wrinkling. That's why we have all the ironing the linen. Because it wrinkles like crazy.
We have time for one more quick question. And I'm hoping though, even after the questions have ended, hopefully Nikki's gonna stay around.
Oh, yeah, you know,
I do have another one.
Okay, we have refreshments next door. Also, if anybody is interested, I forgot to announce it to begin with. And finding out about the status of the McDonald House, I'll tell you about that formally. So kind of interesting little backstory there. Anyway, Nikki, thank you so much for here. Thank you, gift. And our thank you gift to you is this hand ditch because your main gift is a 2-year membership. Avoided being a member all this time. She's afraid we're going to make her an officer, so we are giving her a membership, and we promise for the remainder of the year that I ask you to be an officer.
I noticed she said for the remainder of all bets are off. That's right. That's right.
Thank you. All right, let's join us for
Albert fiscal year.
I'll
Fiscal year ends in September.